I almost went with a really obnoxious opening for this video, like, it's Walpurgisnacht, bitches, but I'm gonna go with my regular opening. Hi, my name is Chris. I am your friendly neighborhood Baba Duchess, film critic, horror blogger, and always a drive-in mutant. And that is especially important for this video because I will be talking about Walpurgisnacht, which is also known as Witches' Night. And this is something that I didn't really know about until I saw a certain episode of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. Now, this is my second annual video. I plan to do this every year. And I know Joe Bob would approve because he and Darcy are really trying to make this a more recognized holiday so that all of us horror lovers can have a second Halloween, which is one of the names that's been kicked around for calling this night. As I mentioned, I did my inaugural video on this last year, and I'm going to just put a little snippet that explains what Walpurgisnacht actually is. But Walpurgisnacht is named after Saint Walpurga. Her feast day is on May 1st, but the night before, that is said when witches are about. And it's also said, at least in pagan terms, that is when the veil between the living and the other side is thin, just like on Halloween, or Samhain, as it's also called in the pagan culture. So this is a night where the witches take flight. They go up to the mountains in Germany, but the townspeople are building bonfires, they're drinking, they're partying, they're warding away the evil spirits, but they're also having fun. And the next day is the feast day of Saint Walpurga, who is said to keep people safe at night from the witches. She's also a patron saint of healing. So it happens every April 30th, which is the night before Beltane, May 1st, which is celebrated in a lot of pagan traditions. And what better way to celebrate the night when the witches are out and about on their way for their big celebration than to watch some witch movies? I'm going to cover about a handful of them in this video, and I went with ones this year that are maybe ones that don't get as much love as they should, maybe some that you've heard of but never really got around to watching. Last year I covered movies like The Craft, Pyewacket, Eve's Bayou, and this year I definitely have more of a folk horror flavor, which there is a lot of overlap between folk horror and witch movies. Not all folk horror involves a witch or witchcraft, but in many cases they do. And the first movie I'm going to talk about is The Wretched, which came out in 2019. And this one can best be described by calling it a coming-of-age witchy folk horror, body horror homage to like Fright Night and The Burbs. So if that sounds like something you're into, you should check this one out. You're essentially following two stories. You have a family, father, mother, two kids, and the mother brings home a sort of witchy force that starts taking over. And then you also have the main character, who is a 17-year-old boy who is spending the summer with his father, and he has just arrived and lives next door to these people, and he notices something strange is going on. The oldest child seems to be hiding from his mother. He doesn't know exactly what's wrong, but only that something is, and that does not seem to be his mother. So teenage Ben and his friend Mallory decide to do some investigating into this family next door. For those of you who are fans of The Burbs, there is a great reference to the note scene in The Burbs.
No, it's my note.
Which I questioned it for a second if that's what it really was, but then I thought there is no way that the people that made this movie are not making this a direct reference. This movie even opens with a scene from the 80s, even though the movie itself takes place now. And it does have a lot of your standard, like I said, coming of age things. Ben has friction with his father, who is separated from his mother. He's got a new job, and basically the rich kids in the area are giving him a really hard time. And now he's involved with this mystery with his neighbors, and nobody will believe him except his friend, who doesn't fully believe him. She doesn't disbelieve him, but she's a little weary, but does want to help him. So again, that's where you can kind of see the pieces of Fright Night in there. So definitely a bit of a love letter to these 80s movies while being its own thing. Because the witch in this movie is a being who possesses people and slowly, through one person, starts to take over and destroy the rest of the family because her objective is to get to the kids. Kind of a more traditional Baba Yaga, Hansel and Gretel, where a witch wants children for nefarious purposes. It definitely has a very creepy atmosphere, and that is in no small part due to the sound design. It has amazing sound. You hear all these pops and crackling when people are in the woods that are by the houses. And then, of course, when the body horror comes into play, you can hear all sorts of nasty noises with that too. But this movie has a little bit for everyone. It has a big mishmash of subgenres in it. It's one I enjoy a lot. I've seen it twice, and my biggest complaint being that the climax does run a little long, even though the movie itself is only an hour and a half. But if that's my biggest complaint, you're doing pretty good. So check that one out if you like something that does have some references to past movies and genres, but does not overly rely on them to make the story. The next one I'm going to talk about is Sugar Hill, which came out in 1974. And maybe this one does play out more as a zombie movie, but not really. There are zombies involved, and that is because this is a movie that centers on voodoo. Now, voodoo and witchcraft are two totally different things. One is a more solitary practice, whereas voodoo is a community, and witchcraft, like your traditional movie witchcraft, maybe one person just using it to have control over somebody else or influence over somebody else, which is not to say that it is like Wicca, which is also a religion that is still practiced today. So very completely different things in the three of them. So I'm focusing more on the movie witchcraft aspect, but I also wanted to talk about some things that are within the realm without being directly connected. And Sugar Hill is about a woman whose boyfriend is murdered by a group of men who want to take over his club. It is a very basic story of revenge. Sugar goes to Mama Matrice, who is a voodoo priestess, and says, I want these men who killed my lover dead. And Mama Matrice doesn't really want to have much to do with this because she can sense that Sugar is not a true believer in this practice. However, she does do what Sugar asks because of how desperate Sugar seems to be. So she summons Baron Samedi, who is like a lord of the dead. He can get this undead army to do what needs to be done. So throughout the movie, one by one, you see these, I guess you could call them mobsters. One by one, this army of the dead, led by Baron Samedi, take down these men. And what I really like is, now the zombies are not the focus. They are there, but these are more of the traditional voodoo zombies that a lot of movies had before George Romero kind of changed the game with Night of the Living Dead. Before that, zombies were, like in this movie, they were just used more as means to an end. They were just very mindless, and you could just point them in a direction, tell them, I want this person, or do away with that person, and they would just do your bidding. That was more what their use was, as opposed to when Romero did Night of the Living Dead, that was kind of the mindless eating machines that went out of their own volition and attacked people. And then, of course, we saw with Lucio Fulci's Zombie, where he kind of married the two, which I really liked that, where you had the voodoo traditions, but then the zombies themselves were the, flesh-eating, basically land sharks. But in this one, it is the more traditional, where Baron Samedi has to guide them and point in that direction, and okay, now this is what we're doing. And the look of the zombies is really great. They're just covered in these cobwebs and have these large metallic eyes. And Baron Samedi is such a great character. He is played by Don Pedro Colley, and he plays it in this way where there's almost like a twinkle in his eye where he's having fun, but he also has this menace to him where he is going to do these evil deeds and he's going to enjoy doing it. I just thought it looked like a fun role to play. It looked like he was having fun, but it was also very dark. And that can be hard to do, to balance those two things together. So we have our voodoo priestess and kind of our Lord of the Dead. And Sugar is pointing them in the direction, okay, now we're going to take care of this person who killed my man. And in the meantime, you have Sugar's ex-boyfriend, Valentine, who is investigating these murders. Because when you have a bunch of mobsters showing up dead, that is very suspicious, especially when some of them have been implicated in a previous murder. And Valentine is played by Richard Lawson, who I thought he looked familiar, and horror fans will know him in Poltergeist. And he did a lot of episodic television. As someone who grew up in the 80s, when I looked through the filmography, and I'm like, I saw him probably in all of these shows. So we have a police procedural going on, and at the same time, we have our voodoo practices. Again, it is a simple story, but I also think it's one that people can relate to. You know, if someone took someone from you in a very violent manner, you would want revenge too. And what are you willing to do for it? But there is something about, especially like the horror films, where they're done with a wink in their eye, where this does seem really fun on its surface, but we're also tackling some very heavy subjects, which is one of the things that I love most about horror in general, where here you have the story about someone asking a witch for help and summoning a zombie army. But we are also talking about issues like gentrification, just flat out racism. And these zombies that have been raised from the dead are the bodies of slaves. So as Sugar is getting her revenge, in a way, so are the undead. Because to me, that's one of the things that horror can do best, where you can take very serious real world issues and you can explore them in this way. And, you know, if you're not looking for it, you can just watch the movie and just be entertained, but you can dig a little deeper. So check that one out for a great 70s vibe. It has a great soundtrack and score and some really great performances. Now, the next one I'm going to talk about is called The Witches, and it's also called The Devil's Own. It came out in 1966, and it's one of those Hammer films that's a little harder to find. I could not find it streaming anywhere, not even, you know, some copy on YouTube. I ended up buying it. And I don't usually buy things sight unseen, but I thought I'd take a chance. I'm a big Hammer person, and normally I'm more of a fan when I'm talking about movies in my videos, and I did like this one. I had just hoped it would be better, but since I bought it specifically because I thought I would want to talk about it for the video, it is worth seeking out, but I wouldn't run out and buy it. This movie stars Joan Fontaine in a very earnest and hand-wringing role. It has a teacher who we open up where she is a teacher in Africa. They never specify where. They never specify what country in Africa and or what she's teaching or anything. And something happens where she's in the school one night and some members of a local tribe, again, no name of a tribe, where we are, anything like that, basically scare her. There's some masks and it's very obvious. You know, this is the 1960s. There's no nuance. No one is trying to be even somewhat accurate. You know, no one looked at a mask from a certain African country and tried to base this mask off of that. It was just very stereotypical. Thankfully, it wasn't a long scene. But yes, she got scared when she was a teacher, and now she is back in England, and she gets offered a teaching job in a small village at their small school. And this is very, I mean, you could run down the checklist of, you know, folk horror must-haves. small English village. You've got some of the people just are acting creepy for no reason. You have a local butcher who just kind of seems to be a little too into what he's doing. There is a bit of a subplot with two of her students who the village wants to keep them apart. They're two, 14-year-old kids, a boy and a girl, and for whatever reason, the village is just obsessed with keeping them apart. So, of course, Joan Fontaine starts to kind of think something really isn't right in this village. What is going on? And of course, with all these strange people in the village, she kind of gets it in her head that, maybe they want her for some kind of ritual. And as the viewer, you kind of start thinking to yourself, well, is that what's going on? Or are they just trying to just drive her crazy because they don't like her, maybe? It's very much, folk horror by the numbers with some really bad green screen effects. I mean, I understand how these things work. It was the 1960s, but there were a couple that even for the time were pretty bad. A lot of that stuff I could forgive, though, if the actual ritual ceremony wasn't so lame. It was just, there was no sense of menace or danger. I might have actually kind of laughed out loud a little bit. For a movie that had a very solid middle, the beginning and the end kind of left something to be desired. Again, it is worth watching if you are a Hammer horror fan, a Hammer horror completist. There was plenty to be entertained by and that I did like. It just, unfortunately, it was not one of the stronger offerings from that studio. And the last one I'm going to talk about is The Blood on Satan's Claw. This one is usually held up, like with the big, trilogy of folk horror at the time, where you had this and Witchfinder General and The Wicker Man. They were kind of like the three standard bearers of the genre. And one day, a young farmer finds an odd, malformed skull while he's out plowing the field. And this, of course, sinks the whole village into madness because, this was a time where everything was of the devil. And anytime I watch something that's in like the 1500s or thereabout, I always think to myself, what an absolutely miserable time to be alive. I mean, not only just because of, sickness and, lack of hygiene practices and things like that, but also all just the deeply rooted superstition. And I mean, to be a woman at that time, it was just absolute hell. So after the skull is found, of course, people, like I said, they start acting strangely, and some people start finding that they have this patch of fur on their skin, which they are calling the devil's skin. And much like in The Crucible, this group of young girls kind of form this little coven, and they have a woman named Angel at the head of it. And they are out in the woods, performing rituals and killing people. Meanwhile, the rest of the village is just blaming plain old the devil. Everyone starts falling apart under paranoia. The more I watched it, it was just a very kind of a more British version of The Crucible, just with less legal procedure. And much like how the paranoia grows and grows and gets passed from one person to another, that is how the film is formatted, where you will follow at first you are following, the farmer who found the skull, and then you are following another villager, and then you are following another villager and their family. So I did like how the story played out. And you see where some people are trying to, get to what is really going on, but other people are falling under Angel's spell, for lack of a better word. And slowly but surely, the village just kind of tears itself apart because the village itself is its own enemy. Like I said, it's a time just full of superstition and suspicion. And when you want to blame your neighbor for being under the power of the devil, it doesn't take much for things to get out of control and for people to just start taking it out on each other. I will warn that there is one scene with SA, but overall, this is one of the kind of more important movies if you're into the folk horror genre. There were obviously some, before it and, like The Wicker Man and stuff like that. But this one was one of the ones that kind of set, the aesthetic. And I won't say the rules because there aren't really any hard and fast ones. It sets what these movies kind of look like and what different kinds of things they can involve. This one does have a rather abrupt ending, and it also has, leading up to that, there's just this overuse of slow-mo where you just want them to just get to the point. But this one is one of your folk horror, witchy, fundamental movies. So if this is a subgenre that you really like and you haven't seen this one, I would say give it a go. Again, I mentioned it with Witchfinder General and The Wicker Man, and I think this one is the weakest of the three, but it is still very good. So those are my offerings for you this Walpurgisnacht as you prepare to get on your broom and ride out to the Brocken and meet the other witches and party. If you do have AMC Plus or Shudder on Friday the 24th at 9 o'clock Eastern, the last drive-in will be on, and they will be doing their Walpurgisnacht episode. So if you've heard me talk about Joe Bob before and you're not really familiar with it, come on and join the Mutant Fam. It's always a good time. Otherwise, hopefully I've given you some suggestions that you might want to check out. As always, like, share, subscribe, comment, do all the things. Get the algorithm working for me. I appreciate every little bit of it. I will have some more reviews in the days to come. And as always, like what you like, don't be a dick. And empathy is a superpower.